Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to pay tribute to Mandy Damari and her family for the strength that they have shown. And we on this side of the House, and I'm sure the whole House, continue to seek the speedy release of Emily Damari and the other hostages. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about immigration. I think it's probably a good time to remind him that he was the one writing letters asking us not to deport foreign criminals. And he and his party voted against every single measure that we put in place to try and limit immigration. But, Mr. Speaker, the question today is what has been on the lips of all Labour MPs, including, I believe, the Health Secretary yesterday. The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Transport Secretary was right when further information came forward to resign. What a marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million net money, and she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it, she advocated it, record numbers of immigration.
Mr. Speaker, he's obfuscating, but I'm going to keep him on the topic. He owes the House an explanation. He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light.
What is that?
What was that further information?
Exactly.
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. Whilst she's obsessing with the Westminster issues, we're getting on with fixing the mess, fixing the foundations, that £22 billion black hole, our prisons bursting, Mr. Speaker, as we found out last week, nearly 1 million net migration numbers because of the Tory open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about migration. I'm asking about the former Transport Secretary. He never answers any questions. He never answers any questions. And it looks like he didn't ask his Transport Secretary any questions either. The truth is, he appointed a person convicted of fraud to the Cabinet. The first thing she did was bung hundreds of millions of pounds in pay rises to her trade union friends. Wasn't this a fraud on the British people?
No, Mr. Speaker, she says she's not talking about immigration. I'm not surprised. And I advise her and all of them not to talk about the economy or immigration for another 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, he can try and change the topic as much as he likes, but the public are watching. He owes them an explanation. The country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. Now on to an even bigger fraud. Now on to an even bigger fraud, the budget. Last week, the Prime Minister failed to repeat the Chancellor's pledge of no more borrowing and no more taxes. Yep. It is obvious that they are coming back for more. Yep. In his manifesto, he committed to making Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. Does he stand by his own pledge?
Yep.
Mr. Speaker, I gently remind her that 2 of her predecessors had convictions for breaking the COVID rules. I'd also invite her to look at the OECD report of this morning, which has upgraded growth for next year and the year after, which now puts us on target to be the highest growing major economy in Europe in the next 2 years. She should welcome that.
Mr. Speaker, I saw the OECD report, and what it said was that they will be coming back for more taxes. And I think the whole House would have heard him fail to repeat his own pledge. He can't even repeat the pledges that he made just a few weeks ago. We are here to stop him from damaging the economy, and that is why we are
I want to hear the question. Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing laughing the same way they all laughed during the budget when they talked about raising NI. They have no idea what people out there are dealing with. And that is why yesterday we voted against his damaging jobs tax. Even former supporters, Chef Tom Kerridge, who endorsed Labour at the election, said that the budget was catastrophic. He built a real business employing young people, unlike his cabinet of trade union stooges, CV embellishers, and an actual fraudster. None of them have ever run a business. Why won't he listen to business who are saying his budget is catastrophic?
Mr. Speaker, I thought the scripted jokes were over, but we had another one about lectures about the economy from the party opposite. They broke the economy, mortgages through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole. And she talks about national insurance. She complains about the rise in national insurance week after week. But then 2 weeks ago, she says that she wouldn't reverse it. She signed trade deals, Mr. Speaker, that had farmers protesting in Whitehall. Now she pretends that she's their champion. She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister has discarded his own Labour leadership promises. He's dropped the 5 missions he said would define his government. He's ditched his pledge to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. We left office with UK the fastest growing economy in the G7. And business is saying he has damaged the economy with his budget. Tomorrow he's going to have an emergency reset, Mr. Speaker, just 5 months into his premiership. But why should anyone believe a word he says?
Mr. Speaker, the only relaunch on that side of the House is the leadership bids of her rivals. She obviously hasn't read the OECD report of this morning, the fastest growth in the next 2 years of any major economy in Europe. We're proud of that. And they should never be allowed to forget the damage they did to our country. They used Britain like some sort of mad scientist experiment. Open borders, unfunded tax cuts, neglected health service. And now, all the madness is still coming out. They say they should be back in office. They haven't listened, they haven't learned, and they certainly haven't changed. There's only one party that's driving this country forward, and that's this Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, question 3, but who knows, next week I could be #1 in the charts. As the first MP this year to bring out a Christmas single, will the Prime Minister join me in thanking my musical collaborator, the hugely talented Mal Pope, and everyone involved with this year's Everyone Deserves hamper campaign that would deliver festive food to 1,500 homes across 5 constituencies in South Wales. Like our song says, there's a reason for the season, and everyone deserves a Christmas.
Well, I thank her for her question. There's obviously going to be some rivalry in the race for #1 by Christmas. I'm not going to be joining in that particular one. But I do thank her and Mal Pope for their campaigning. And I remember joining her in the summer, a few summers ago, on the work involving hampers, much needed by her constituents. And I know how much it means to them. Christmas is a time to think of others. And I do pay tribute to her and all those supporting those in need. And this government will always support the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I, for one, will be downloading the song of the Honourable Lady for Neath and Swansea East. Can I join the Prime Minister in his delight and also his support for Mani Damari, and our joint hope that we will see Emily and other hostages released as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to restore and rebuild the public's trust in British politics. Now, we believe a crucial part of that is reforming our electoral system to make it fairer and more proportional. And so does a majority of the British public. And this House voted yesterday in favour of a bill for electoral reform put forward by my honourable friend, the member for Richmond Park. So will the Prime Minister find government time, make it available, so we can consider this bill on electoral reform and restore the public's trust in our politics?
Can I thank him for referencing Emily, because I think it is important that we all remember her, and I say the awful torture that her mother is going through, and that's the case for all of the other hostages. It's hard to imagine what it must be like for anybody with friends and family who are still being held hostage after all this time. Look, proportional representation is not our policy. We won't be making time for it. And I just gently say to him, he didn't do too badly under the system as it is.
Well, I'm disappointed in that reply and hope he will reflect on Labour's own policy. But moving on to another pressing subject, Mr. Speaker, more than 3 million people have been stuck on NHS waiting lists for more than 18 weeks. That's probably the worst, most appalling legacy of the last Conservative government, and it needs to be fixed. But does the Prime Minister accept that we'll only get waiting lists down and keep them down if it's easier for everyone to see a GP when they need it? So when he publishes his milestones tomorrow, will he include a guarantee with a timetable so people will be able to see a GP within at least 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent?
Well, he's right to draw attention to the record of last government on the NHS. Record waiting lists and record low confidence in the NHS. So in addition to the economy and immigration, they better not be talking about that for the next 5 years either. We will be driving this down. We've already begun that work to make sure we get those waiting lists down. And yes, of course, that does also include making sure there's better access to GPs and other measures that need to be taken. But that's a central driving mission of this government. Thank you.